We are back on Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio, News Talk 1180, 1230 KGEO, 1410 KERI, and now on KKIM in New Mexico.
I want to finish up the Prop 13 situation.
But let me reintroduce our guest. Our guest by phone is Tom Del Beccaro, the California Republican chairman.
How are you? Thanks for having me back.
All right, I want to finish up the Prop 13 situation briefly by basically saying that the legislature is going to go ahead and try to get rid of it. Vetoes, then Brown's going to veto it, and then they're going to override his veto, so Brown will look good.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because a lot of people talked about the big deal was that they were getting the ability to raise taxes by themselves without Republican votes. But the real threat was, for me, was exactly what you described, the ability to override vetoes and play games like you just described. And, you know, the legislature is far more liberal than Jerry Brown. There's some real socialists there. There's people who have no sense of basic economics, which is the higher something costs, the less of it you get. The higher the price car, the less sales. The higher the cost of jobs, the less jobs. They don't accept that. They think that, you know, it's really an Atlas Shrugged situation. They just think that you need to hand over your stuff to the state, and that's what causes this.
You know, maybe if we did what Shannon Grove and Michael Reagan are trying to do is put in a part-time legislature, these people would have to get a real job, and then they'd realize that what they're doing is destroying this state as well as the country.
Well, we clearly need a part-time legislature. We need a spending cap. But unfortunately, now that Prop 32 was unsuccessful, they're just enormously powerful in this state, and they're going to drive it down. You know, my article in Forbes is called "The Worst Is Yet to Come for California," and what they're going to do is drive this economy so far down. And look, more taxes are ahead. They're going to find that, you know, as people leave and unemployment grows, that their revenues fall short. They're going to go after Prop 13. They'll tax even more, drive it down further, and then we're going to see whether the voters here will stand up for once. The problem is so many Republican voters are leaving the state. You know, there's this talk about the registration level of Republicans in the state, and it fell below 30% for two reasons. One, online registration. The Democrats registered some gobs of people in L.A. We'll see whether those are real. I have my doubts. But also, they're leaving this. Republicans are leaving the state for friendlier confines.
Amazing. You know, you just did a little segue there for me. I was going to ask you about voter fraud. I mean, it's amazing what you see going on. I'm starting to feel like we're living in a third world country, but you know, there was 59 wards in Philadelphia. There wasn't one vote for Romney. And then I think it was Cayuga County in Ohio, 99% of the vote in 100 precincts was for Obama. I mean, that's...
Well, and in Florida, there was a 141% turnout in some... Look, voter fraud is a huge problem. I have never trusted, and I go round and round with John Fund on this, I have never trusted electronic voting. It's the easiest thing to corrupt. I mean, look, you go to a website and your computer can get corrupted. If we don't think, and by the way, who's manning these machines? The SEIU. If you look at all the circumstances in this last election where people were pressing buttons and it came up Obama instead of Romney, not a single time did it come up, not a single report did it come up other than Obama when people were trying to vote for someone else. In other words, it didn't come up the third-party candidate. It didn't come up for Romney when people were pressing Obama. So, you know, unless the national Republicans, and I'm afraid this is going to happen at a national level, and by the way, these things happened in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Florida. There are 3 Republican governors. If they don't get together and work on this, not only do I not believe that we can win those states and therefore the presidency in the future, but they are going to lose the faith of Republican voters for not at least looking into this, if not solving it.
We're having a conversation with Tom Del Beccaro, chairman of the California Republican Party.
Tom, what have you heard of, regarding the state of California putting in a single-payer health care system?
Well, of course, every year, that's actually in my article as well. Every
I guess
year,
it looks like I might have read your article, huh?
Yeah, you just gave it all away. Every year, they introduce that type of bill. And, of course, it's enormously expensive. It's an absurd thing to do. But every year they put that up. So now, if we match that with your previous conversation or discussion point, are they going to... Jerry Brown generally vetoes those because it's impossible to do in this circumstance. But how far does this really go? And the real question in the next 2 to 4 years, quite frankly, are the Valley Democrats. Are more Nicole Parras going to appear? Because how far can they go? I mean, the Central Valley, there are ghost towns emerging in the Central Valley. How far can they keep going with this type of thing, and will there be any backlash? And also the other big issue facing California is, what are these big businesses going to do now? You know, some big businesses funded Prop 30 on the hopes that the tax increase would hit consumers directly and not them. Well, now, the day after the election, the ink wasn't even dry in the results, and big labor is calling for big tax increases on big business.
Yeah, it's called their payoff. You know, talking about the Central Valley, you know, for a moment, looking at Rudy Salas and those races, you know, apparently he may be the winner, unfortunately for us.
He is the winner.
Yeah, but I remember when Kevin McCarthy was up there and he gave me a tour of the assembly, and he was showing me where in the back they had certain Democrats sitting in the back, and they allowed them to vote the Republican way at the end of a particular bill, only if there were enough votes to pass it and they didn't need their votes, so they could look a little more conservative.
Yeah, absolutely. But the question is, you know, will these Valley Democrats do that sort of thing just to get away from what you're describing? But that's not going to be enough, because the economy here is going to go back into the ditch rather decisively statewide. And so are there going to be Democrats saying, no, we can't keep doing these kinds of bills? You know, keep in mind, AB 32 is now about to be fully implemented. You have massive tax increase. Now they're going to be looking at Prop 13. Just them saying they're looking at Prop 13, along with huge pension deficits and the rest, this scares people out of the state and scares people from coming to the state. That alone causes people to spend less money and will result in less revenues, because someone who's worried about their financial future spends less than someone who isn't.
Well, I have a solution again. I have lots of solutions. We need 3 states in California: North, South, and Central Valley.
Then I would, if I was going to stay, I would move to the Central Valley, no doubt.
Yeah, I think most Republicans would.
Yeah, I think it would be a Republican area. So Tom, in the few minutes we have left, what's the future here? I mean, what's the future in California? What's the future nationally for the Republican Party and for us in general?
Well, nationally, the economy is going to run aground as well because of all these Obamacare taxes and the like. Republicans need to do a couple of things nationally. This is actually a preview of my next article in Forbes. You know, the Republican Congress over the last 2 years really didn't do that much. And that was a big problem. Can you think of one great thing that came out of the House, one great initiative that they branded themselves on? What Republicans need to do is take a program, and what they need to do is fashion a reform, then hold a press conference, one a month, of some significant program, saying here's what it was intended to do. Here's why it's not really helping these people. Here's a reform that not only will help those people, but will save America blank billions of dollars. And that means with this savings, we could do X, Y, and Z, more teachers, more firefighters, more police. And drop it on the desk of Harry Reid and pressure him. so that over the next 2 years, Republicans in Congress are seen as reformers, while the agendaless Obama just spends the next 4 years, I don't know, doing what. But that's how if they do that and drive the debate, that will help Republicans everywhere in the country. And it's really essential they do that.
You need something I'm not sure Republicans have.
What's that?
It's personal private part.
Intestinal fortitude?
Intestinal fortitude. That's excellent.
That's a great way of putting that.
But that is so necessary, because Obama doesn't have an agenda. He doesn't have a mandate. He didn't promise to do anything except for raise taxes. So what is he going to do over the next 4 years besides czars and undermining us foreign policy and executive orders?
Destroy the military, destroy the country.
Yep.
Yeah, well, look, no doubt. But so Republicans need to drive the agenda and force Obama to react to them. They have that opportunity.
No question about it. Tom, thank you for the time. We'd love to have you come back at another time.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Tom,
for inviting me.
We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio, News Talk 1180.